Thank you, Sebastian. We can start.
Right. Well, welcome everyone, wherever you are, whatever time it is. It's a particularly big pleasure for me to introduce this week Dr. Lisa Agaiby, who is the Academic Dean of St Athanasius College in Melbourne in Australia. She has a PhD from Macquarie University and also from Göttingen University, and she's a great specialist on early Christianity and especially Coptic Christianity, and she has recently been co-producing with some other scholars the sayings of St. Anthony in various different languages, putting them all together. There are quite a lot of them. And she's going to talk to us about the manuscript project, the cataloguing project at the Coptic Monastery of St Paul the Hermit in the desert near the Red Sea in Egypt. So over to you, Lisa. And I think we are going to have a wonderful slideshow too, I'm told.
Thank you, Sebastian, and thank you for that very kind introduction. And it's a real pleasure actually for me to be presenting to you today and to share with you a project that's not only very close to my heart, but also a project that I believe is very important for cultural heritage. And so what I intend to do is just to give you an idea of what the goals of our project is, and also to share with you some of the findings that we've come across to date. So I will just share my screen with you. Okay, so I'm assuming you can all see my screen at the moment.
Yes, that's all.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so as you're aware, manuscripts are one of the most important witnesses of history and cultural heritage. They are an unparalleled resource of human knowledge and artistic expression, and together with oral tradition are an invaluable record of the wisdom of past civilizations. And that's why the loss of such material is an irreversible loss of significant knowledge. For millennia, monasteries have been the custodians of cultural heritage, and this is particularly true for the Coptic Christians of Egypt, where much of their 2,000-year-long textual heritage has been characterized by looting, dispersion, natural disasters, accidental or planned destruction, as well as neglect after centuries of being hidden away in ancient fortresses and places that lack conditions necessary for their preservation. The Coptic Monastery of St Paul the Hermit in Egypt's eastern desert has existed almost continuously for the last 1,600 years. And because of its location near a major Red Sea trade route, it has been at the crossroads of cultural movements and exchanges from late antiquity through to the early modern era, between the Near East, the Mediterranean and Ethiopia, and this diversity is reflected in their material heritage. Silenced, forgotten, and inaccessible within the monastery for over a millennium are precious materials, precious manuscripts that now lie in a serious state of deterioration and practically unknown to the outside world. As a result of the antiquities trade in Egypt, a number of prized manuscripts from St. Paul's Monastery are dispersed in libraries and museums around the world. And what remains is a collection of over 1,000 manuscripts dating from the 10th to the 20th centuries that represent one of the single most important collection of Christian literature in the world. The manuscripts are in a poor state of preservation and have not been systematically catalogued. Furthermore, due to lack of funding and expertise, the custodians struggle to protect their collections and thus risk losing a vital part of their heritage. In 2018, I, together with a dedicated team, began the work at the monastery's manuscript library to digitise and catalogue their precious collection. In fact, it is the first time in the monastery's history for a team to be given permission to carry out such a privileged task. Our work has been supported and facilitated by the generosity and hospitality of the abbot of the monastery, Bishop Daniel, as well as Father Sawiris of blessed memory, who first championed this initiative, and the monastery's librarians, Father Matthias and Father Mina. The University of Divinity in Melbourne, Australia, has also provided us with a number of generous research grants in support of this project. Now, the aim of this project is threefold. Firstly, to digitise the manuscripts to eliminate the real threat of further damage already caused by insects, humidity, and neglect. Secondly, to restore damaged manuscripts in order to preserve them for posterity. And finally, to produce a detailed codicological catalogue of the collection so that we may present the works of our ancient traditions to the scholarly community. Now, unlike working with museum collections or digitised images, this project works with the physical artefacts and deals directly with monastic cultural heritage, where the manuscripts themselves and the traditions contained within the manuscripts are still very much part of the living religious community. Now, Egypt has long been regarded as the birthplace of Christian monasticism, and St. Anthony the Great is recognized as the father of the monastic movement. But according to Jerome, who authored the life of Paul the Hermit in the 4th century, he declared that it was in fact Paul who preceded Anthony in withdrawing into the desert and establishing a small hermitage in the eastern desert of Egypt. At the end of his life, Paul was discovered by Anthony the Great, who 40 years before their meeting had established a similar hermitage on the other side of the same mountain in the eastern desert near the Red Sea. And so it's because of their locations near the Red Sea that the monasteries of both St. Anthony and St. Paul are simply referred to as the Red Sea monasteries. And in fact, up until the 18th century, the two Red Sea monasteries were considered as one community. Jerome's account of Anthony discovering Paul in the Egyptian desert firmly linked the two saints in Christian imagination. And according to the prominent Latin monk John Cassian, Anthony and Paul personified the origins of Egyptian monasticism. In time, Paul's hermitage became the core of a monastic settlement in which his cave serves as a church, and since the 4th century has been the nucleus and spiritual heartbeat of the monastery. The cave church of St. Paul the Hermit gives material witness to sustained devotion to the saint in the form of multiple phases of enlargement, medieval and 18th century wall paintings, icons, liturgical furnishings, and a wealth of manuscripts that will be the focus of my presentation. The Monastery of St. Paul is one of the most remote of the Coptic desert monasteries and is traditionally held to be one of the oldest functioning monasteries in the Christian world. And except for periods of devastation in the 14th and 16th centuries, the monastery has been continuously occupied for the last 1600 years. The earliest account we have of the site associated with Paul the Hermit being visited by pilgrims dates to around the year 400, when a friend of the Latin ascetic Sulpicius Severus travelled to the Holy Land and then went to Egypt, where he writes he visited two monasteries of St. Anthony, which are at the present day occupied by his disciples, and that place in which the most blessed Paul, the first of the eremites, had his abode. However, it would be another 1,000 years before we read of another Western traveller, again making the difficult journey out. And accounts of Western travellers to the monastery then become well attested from the early 17th century onwards, and the accounts they have left behind affirm that the main reason for their visit was to acquire manuscripts, as we see here on this slide. But in order to appreciate the effort these travellers went to get to the monastery, it's important to keep in mind that because of its geographic location and isolation, the journey prior to the arrival of the motor car in Egypt in the 20th century took anywhere between 4 to 10 days by camel caravan across a very barren and, as Jerome describes, terrible desert from the Nile Valley. Writing in 1901, the British rector Sir Montague Fowler recorded, "Because of its geographic isolation and inaccessibility, St Paul's has scarcely ever been visited by Europeans, so that it is impossible to say what treasures in the way of manuscripts and antiquities might be discovered within its precincts." But the travellers who determined to make the difficult trek out had every right to be curious. The monastery library at St Paul's is remarkable in the richness of its holdings that extends across the centuries, from the 10th to the 20th centuries, and is the second largest collection of Copto-Arabic manuscripts in Egypt after the neighbouring monastery of St Anthony the Great. Now, in regards to the dates of the manuscripts in the collection, as well as their quantity, there are three things to keep in mind. The first is that, as a result of the antiquities trade, a large number of its prized manuscripts are now dispersed in collections around the world. Secondly, between the late 14th to the late 16th century, the Monastery of St Paul suffered plague as well as devastation twice at the hands of Bedouin tribes, who pillaged and burned everything on site, including the library. For this reason, only a very small number of manuscripts predate the 14th century, and the books that miraculously survived have done so because, according to monastic oral tradition, they were buried beneath floors in monastic cells or hidden within the monastery walls. The third point to keep in mind is that between the 17th and 19th centuries, all the patriarchs of the Coptic Church were chosen from the Red Sea monasteries in unbroken succession. And these patriarchs afforded great effort to repopulate not only the monastery with monks after they had suffered devastation, but also to repopulate the libraries with books. And we've come across a number of manuscripts in the collection that contain marginalia as well as endowment statements, such as the one here on this slide, describing the restoration projects at the monastery and the efforts some of the patriarchs went to repopulate the monastery's library. Throughout the centuries, the manuscripts at St Paul's were housed in a number of locations. For the most part of the long history of the monastery, manuscripts were kept in wooden boxes in the tower, as well as in a church annex, namely the Church of the Archangel Michael. And this is something we know not only from oral tradition, but also from traveller accounts and scribal notes. For example, an endowment statement in a manuscript dated 1714 warns, "No one shall be permitted to take a book out of the church by any means, except for copying or reading it and then returning it back," thus inferring that manuscripts were kept in the church. But at the same time, Claude Sicard, a French Jesuit priest visiting the monastery in 1716, records that he saw in the fortress a room full of manuscripts. Perhaps because of the size of the collection, these two pieces of evidence suggest that manuscripts were housed in more than one location. Then in 1904, two Cambridge scholars, Agnes Smith-Lewis and Margaret Dunlop Gibson, visited the monastery and recorded they were given permission to examine the store of manuscripts at St Paul's, which were kept in a small room behind the sanctuary in the Church of St Michael. Then finally, in the mid-1990s, when the collection was expanded due to the transfer of some 300 manuscripts from the monastery's agricultural dependency in the Nile Valley to the main monastery at the Red Sea, the books were gathered and deposited in a designated building that was previously a refectory located against the eastern wall of the monastery's enclosure, and the manuscripts are still housed there to this day. Now, the manuscripts in the library's collection are ordered according to 5 classifications. There are 151 biblical manuscripts, 168 theological, 143 historical, 788 liturgical, and 21 miscellaneous. So in total, there is 1,271 manuscripts in the collection. Now, of this collection, the majority are in Arabic, a small number are entirely in Coptic, and a number of manuscripts have Coptic and Arabic in parallel columns. There are also a small number of Syriac and Ge'ez manuscripts and fragments, which I'll speak about shortly. Now, the information I've provided here is just a brief overview of the precious collection and size that we're dealing with. So in terms of our project at the Monastic Library, there are 4 important tasks that are carried out. These are digitising the manuscripts, documenting the physical attributes of the manuscripts, and this includes such things as documenting the dimensions, paper type, type of binding, sewing stations, number of quires, end-bands, cover type, decorations of covers, paste downs, and manuscript condition. We trace all the watermarks within the manuscripts. And finally, we document all the scribal conventions like the salient features, significant marginal notes, and internal contents, including colophons and endowment statements in full. Now, the final task of documentation is carried out by specialists who work off the digitized manuscripts, whereas the first 3 tasks take place on site by postgraduate students under my supervision who have received training in manuscript handling and codicology. The documentation of colophons in full is significant because they contain valuable historical information that can help us in piecing together the history of the monastery at certain points in time that we cannot glean from other historical sources. The scribe's language contained in the following colourful colophon is representative and contains a number of attributes found in many colophons in the collection, as well as in Copto-Arabic manuscripts generally. It reads, "Copying was finished and completed with the help of God by the hand of the poor, the wretched one who contains all sins, who returns to his vomit like dogs, the one who is lazy during times of prayers and active in gluttony and the lusts of the body, whose sins are manifested like blackness on his face, who does not deserve to be called a human or an animal, the sinner, the poor one, imperfect scribe, low, full of sins, full of faults and ugliness, stained with the sins of his days and years, devoid of virtues and clad in vice, who does not deserve to raise his head, and unworthy to be called by name, Thomas, one of the servants of the sons of our father St Paul. I ask the masters who are reading this, for the sake of Christ, say, O our Lord Jesus Christ, in your compassion forgive his sins and the sins of his father and mother. And this book was written for the revered Father, who is an angel in the flesh and a luminous human, who was crowned with the chaste angelic form, the truly humble one, the son of St Paul, who resembles John in his chastity and Isaac in his obedience, the one who paid from his own money for the making of this book, our father, the monk John of St Paul's Monastery. May Christ our God grant him a share with his father St Paul. Amen. And this blessed book was completed in the year 1457 of the Pure Martyrs, which corresponds to the year 1740. May their prayers and intercessions be with us, and it was written in the Monastery of St Paul the Hermit, which is inhabited by monks. Now, characteristic in a number of the manuscripts that contain colophons is the petitioning by the scribe to the reader to show compassion and tolerance towards the scribe's deficiencies. Statements such as, he who reads and finds a mistake and corrects it, God will correct all things in his life, and whosoever shall invoke on him any blessing, may it be granted back to him, are common. Now, it has been suggested that many of the self-deprecating adjectives the scribe attributes to himself, as well as the pleas he addresses to the reader, is what puts Christian Arabic colophons in a tradition quite distinct from that of Islamic Arabic manuscripts. Now, analysing colophons can tell us precious information about the motives for scribes copying a text that range from copying for one's own use to having been commissioned by patrons to the important incentive of being granted forgiveness and eternal life. And this is clearly articulated in the following examples from our collection. It is hoped that by fulfilling the saying of our good Saviour, that whoever writes a biography that will be read in the church to Christian people, God will tear apart the book of his sins and write his name in the book of life. And also, hoping from those reading this book for the sake of Christ to say, O our Lord Jesus Christ, in your compassion forgive his sins and the sins of his father and mother. Patrons also had a share in spiritual blessings by virtue of their sponsorship, as expressed in the petition. May Christ our God grant the patron a long and joyful life, and after a long life on earth, grant him eternal salvation. Now, the following colophon is interesting in that it provides us with information on the intended audience of the texts upon whom blessings are bestowed. And it says, may his supplications be with us, O brothers, and with the poor sinner, the scribe, and with the owner and the reader, and the one who commissioned this book, and the listener, and all the children of baptism. Now, like colophons, endowment statements, or waqf as they are called in Arabic, are also important to document in full because they give important details, such as the recipient of the waqf, to the conditions of which the waqf is to be applied, and the consequences of both dishonouring and adhering to the conditions of the waqf. And so the following is also an example of a typical waqf statement found in our collection. It reads, an eternal endowment and everlasting possession for the monastery of our Holy Father, the great righteous St Paul the Hermit. No one shall be permitted or absolved to take it to the countryside, or to keep it in their cells, or for it to be pawned, or to be sold, or to be taken out of the church by any means, except for copying or reading it and then returning it back. And whosoever shall disobey and remove it from the place of its endowment will be subject to the harsh banishment of God, and his share will be with Simon the magician, and Diocletian the infidel, and Judas the traitor, and Herod the apostate. May God keep us from this, and blessings be upon the son of obedience. But the state of the disobedient one is spoiled, and thanks be to God. A closer examination of the endowment statements reveals some interesting aspects. Now, scholars have often speculated about the existence of scriptoria within Coptic monasteries, but concrete evidence for this at the Red Sea monasteries is very slim. So far, we have not discovered any internal evidence such as scribal notes to record such organisation, nor is there external evidence such as travellers or visitors reporting seeing scribes at work. So while there may be arguments to support this notion, I wish to demonstrate that there are also arguments in favour of the private and individualised production of texts that were carried out by monks within their cells. Now, a number of Western travellers to the Red Sea monasteries between the 17th and 20th centuries recorded their observations about manuscript collections, where they were housed, and at times they even referred to dialogues they had with the librarians. One would imagine that if a designated writing room or scriptorium existed, at least some of the travellers would have recorded this. Furthermore, their accounts record the manuscripts as being located in either a room within the monastery's fortress or within the church annex. So, given the limitation in space, it would not seem likely for the space to accommodate a number of scribes working at the same time. But the strongest indication that supports the notion of monks working individually is revealed in the endowment statements. Typical phrases such as no one shall be permitted or absolved to keep books in their cells except for copying or reading it and then returning it back infer that copying took place within the monk's cell, Otherwise, one would imagine that those who wrote endowment statements may have specified a condition that permitted the removal of books from the library or church to a writing room or the like for copying. So while it is not my intention to argue in absolute terms that there was no scriptorium, I wish to suggest that the assumption of the monastery having had a scriptorium was perhaps advanced purely on the basis of logic rather than on the grounds of evidence, and that there is stronger evidence to support the hypothesis that scribes, after having received instruction on scribal conventions, worked and adhered to the guidelines on an individual basis. Now, the final point I'd like to mention in terms of our documentation relates to scribal notes or marginalia. Now, it's a very big and interesting topic, but in a nutshell, there are notes scribes leave in the margins, which at times provide us with windows into the thoughts or conflicts readers within the monastic community may have had with the text that they were either transcribing or reading. A fantastic example is in this 17th century manuscript copy from the Paradise of the Fathers. As we can see here, there are two interesting marginal notes. The notes are written on the page that relates the story of St. Anthony the Great traveling to Frankish countries on a cloud, which of course was the preferred mode of transportation for monastics. So the disapproving hand A in black ink writes, "This story is from the imagination of the scribes, because we found it in many versions of the Paradise, and the saint never went to Frankish countries." Then we see that this comment was crossed out in red ink by a later hand, and the same ink leads us to a second marginal note by way of an arrow, in which hand B refutes the comment by saying, "This story is copied from the life story of the saint, and there is no doubt about it." So as we can see, marginal notes, among other things, give us a glimpse into some of the debates that must have taken place between members of the monastic community and the transcribed text that they were reading. So as you can see, there is a lot of information being collected as part of this project in the hope that we can offer a thorough record of every manuscript in the collection. Now, as I mentioned, one of the things we also document is watermarks. And as you know, one of the most crucial factors used in weighing the importance of a manuscript is its date. And while manuscripts often contain colophons, such as the ones we read above, it is not uncommon for scribes to provide no date. And so we place great emphasis on documenting watermarks to help us ascertain likely dates for undated manuscripts. In addition, manuscripts will be useful in helping us retrace the origins of paper manuscripts and offering us a window into the history of trade practices and networks in the medieval to early modern Mediterranean world. Together, all this information will be used to enable us to look beyond seeing manuscripts as simply repositories of text, and instead approach them as archaeological sites where the original pages and each set of changes within a book can be viewed as strata or layers that testify to the progressive making of the book as it exists today. So here, let me explain. A manuscript, in fact, can be likened to a photograph that captures a very particular moment in its life history. At times, a scribe may provide a glimpse of those histories, for example, if a name or a date is provided. And at times, it is even possible to catch glimpses of the book being used, reused, sold, and even recycled. To make the case in point, I recently observed the following example from a manuscript within the monastery's collection that validates applying an archaeological lens in tracing the journey of a manuscript. Now, this particular manuscript contains a scribal signature dating the book to 1269 and mentioning the copying took place in the Monastery of St Anthony. The book is practically covered in candle wax and discoloured from fingerprints and frequent use, and was heavily annotated by several readers. In the 17th century, it was purchased by a new owner who dismembered it and then rebound it with other texts he had acquired into a larger volume and replaced the old cover with a new cover. Following the owner's death, it was endowed to the Monastery of St Paul, where it is housed today. A century later, a scribe copied a new text on the last 3 fly leaves, which were empty, before it was endowed yet again as an internal endowment to the Monastery of St Paul by Patriarch John XVI in 1708. Various scribes over the centuries wrote their names together with invocations on the front and back pages, and the last signature was that of Thomas Whittemore in 1930 during his expedition to the Monastery of St Paul on behalf of the Byzantine Institute of America. So this is just one example to show how each page and every change within a manuscript are layers attesting to the journey of its adventurous life. Now, there's a lot that can be said, but for the sake of time, I'd like to conclude by sharing with you some of our new finds. Now, one of the greatest things about working in the manuscript library is making discoveries. And each time we go, we discover new finds. These finds often contain discarded, neglected manuscript fragments that over time were left behind and forgotten as more manuscripts were added. Interestingly, some of these finds are in Syriac and Ge'ez, and so with them we can penetrate into an earlier stage in the history of the manuscript collection, although by how long exactly is impossible to say, because in most cases we do not know when the manuscripts reached the monastery or how long they were in use. But we can imagine that they were brought by monks and other pilgrims and either given as gifts during their lifetime or left as a donation after their death. These manuscript fragments are a unique find because they testify to a multicultural community of Oriental Orthodox monks residing at the monastery, which is well attested in medieval traveller reports and marginalia. The new finds also consist of 8 long scrolls that are papal decrees dating to the 17th and 18th centuries. There's a large number of letters and correspondence. There's even canteen lists and even medicinal remedies. And all of these finds will provide new information that will help us construct and reconstruct the history of the monastery throughout its different eras. In addition, from information provided within some of the restored manuscripts, we know that a rebinding exercise took place in the mid-1990s, perhaps at the same time that the books were transferred across to their current location. Unfortunately, in the process of restoring and rebinding some of the books, a few of the original covers were discarded and new leather covers were added. We were fortunate to discover boxes of these discarded covers, some of which contain beautiful buckles, elaborate tooling, and interesting paste downs, and they would certainly be valuable to anyone interested in researching bookmaking or bookbinding. Now, the information I provided here is just a brief overview of both the precious collection we're dealing with and the type of work that we are undertaking at the monastery. But one of the greatest aspects of this project is that it gives the members a unique opportunity to participate in the daily life of the monastery. And whether that means participating in liturgy or enjoying desert walks or spending time with some of the solitary hermits in the isolated mountain caves, each field trip provides the team with a chance to not only touch history, but also reflect in the beautiful setting that is the birthplace of Christian monasticism. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Lisa. What a wonderful talk. Thank you very much. And so beautifully illustrated and most exciting too. As you say, you never know what you're going to find. Yes, my wife, Helen, who's an archaeologist, says the reason why archaeologists often live so long is because they're always expecting some great find the next day.
That's true.
I think that's the same. Yes, so we have, yes, we've got some time for questions. So please, anyone who would like to ask a question, comment, please do so. Put up your hand or put it in the chat, and Taya will probably notice. I was particularly interested that the twin sisters Agnes Lewis and Margaret Gibson had visited. That I didn't know at all. And they were amazingly adventurous. I'm a great admirer of them because they did a huge amount for Syriac. And although their work isn't of the highest quality nowadays, what they did, uncovering things, was quite amazing. And I have a great admiration. Did they leave an account of their visit, or how?
Yes, they did actually. They left a very detailed account of their experience at the monastery. They were there for a couple of days, and they left behind quite a substantial diary of their visit.
Oh, wonderful!
Yeah, so I'm happy to share that with you if you like.
I'd love to see that. Yes, that's very good. Thank you. I was interested in what you said about scriptoria, or the lack of them. That fits in very well with what is my experience of the Syriac situation in various Syriac manuscripts, which produce large numbers of manuscripts. I don't know of any evidence of actual physical scriptoria. It's much more an individual thing. But what I found with both in St. Catherine's and Deir Surian, there are periods of great activity, scribal activity, and then you have long periods without very much. Is that the same in St. Paul's?
So at St. Paul's, the problem is that between the 14th to the 16th century, we have very little information because the monastery suffered devastation. It was actually in ruin for about 100 years. So we have like this gap in information. So it was only from the from the 17th century onwards that that there was kind of like this increase in scribal activity as a result of the patriarchs who wanted to repopulate the libraries and with books and so on. In addition to that, it's a known fact as well that the 18th century was also a period of literary revival in Egypt. And that's why if you look at the manuscript catalogues across the board in Egypt, quite frequently about 50% of their collection would actually be dated to the 18th century.
That's very interesting. Thank you. So on the content, I was surprised the high number, or comparatively high number, of historical manuscripts. That's a great contrast to the situation with Syriac manuscripts in monastery libraries. What sort of historical texts are these?
Okay, that's a very good question. So the types of manuscripts that are included under the category of history are generally lives of saints, so hagiography. All hagiography, and also the Paradise books as well. Paradise.
Yes.
So all of that. So anything hagiographical is considered history.
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe that was just a bit misleading. So it's not history of the monastery.
Well, that answers my query very largely. Thank you.
No problem.
Yes, I was hoping there might be chronicles and things like that.
No, unfortunately not. But we also have copies of the history of the patriarchs, Andrea as well.
Yes.
So we've got some very interesting things actually. So I really can't wait to make it available for everyone.
Very good. On the matter of conservation, do you have specialist conservationists amongst the people you bring, or is this something really for the future and it's just first aid, as it were, at the moment?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and the answer is no. I don't have anyone that does conservation. That is definitely something that we need to do. It's an expectation by the monastery as well, that we will help conserve their manuscripts. I had a wonderful discussion with Andrew Honey from the Bodleian Library a couple of days ago, and he offered some advice, but I put it out there to the community here today that if you are aware of specialists, please do let me know, because this is definitely something that it will be very important for us to do.
Thank you.
It's a really wonderful project, and I just have to say that I feel incredibly privileged and incredibly honoured to be working at the monastery. And as you can imagine as well, that to work in a Coptic monastery, and I think even any monastery, even a Western monastery, a lot of it's actually based on trust relationships. And this is something that's very, very important. And for me personally, I'm not embarrassed to say that what actually drives me in doing this project is first and foremost to preserve cultural heritage. That's the most important thing, and that's what drives me. Anything academic is what comes out of that. But my first and foremost priority is actually preserving cultural heritage. So it is a wonderful project. There are amazing things to be discovered in the library, and rest assured, as soon as I'm in a position to be able to share that information with you, I'll certainly do that.
Thank you. When are you going back to Egypt?
I'm going back in January.
January.
Yeah.
Do you have a session each year, or how does it work?
Yes, so there's 2 field trips. So we usually go every January and every September. Yeah.
For how long each time?
So usually the one in January is usually for the month of January.
Oh, very good.
And then in September, it's usually for about 2 to 3 weeks. And I just have to say that I'm incredibly proud of the team that I have. They work very, very hard. And, we work very long hours. So we usually work from about 7 in the morning until sometimes 10 o'clock at night. So my team, and certainly I could not have accomplished what we've accomplished without them. That's for sure.
Very good. Yes, I know from my experience, it's not always easy, and especially one's always pressured for time.
Yes.
Because suddenly the library is closed or something, and it's your last day, and you just want a teeny bit more information from the manuscript. Can be quite frustrating, but one needs a lot of patience.
That's true.
Yes. So, Lisa, thank you so much. It was really a wonderful experience hearing about this. And I've read a bit about St Paul's Monastery and always been excited. And I've read The Life of St Paul in Syriac, which is very nice. So it's a wonderful job that you and your team are doing, and really important. It's so important. This should be done, even though the conditions are not always very easy. Needs a lot of patience, a lot of perseverance, but it's a rewarding thing in the end, and it will be something, as Thucydides says, "Katema as AI," something that will be an inheritance forever. And to make it like that is a great piece of work.
Well,
so, thank you very much. Thank you so much. Now, our next meeting is on the 14th of December, and it's Joanna Weinberg, who is from Oxford, and she is going to talk about A Jew Reads the Gospels in Syriac, and it's on an amazing Renaissance scholar, Azariah de Rossi. So this should be extremely interesting. So until the 14th of December, same time. So thank you everyone for listening, coming, and thank you, Lisa, so much, and have a good journey back to Australia and then back to Egypt.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. And thank you for your encouragement, and thank you all as well for your participation tonight.
Good, thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.